we're slumming it with our losing franchises here, and that caps us off with our game recaps. We talked about this off air, Joe. The Arizona Cardinals lose to the Green Bay Packers today, 34-13. They attempted to do something they have not done in 3+ years since October 24th of 2021. If everybody's listening closely, the Cardinals attempted to win back-to-back games for the first time in 3 years. They failed again. They have opportunities the rest of this year, but after beating San Francisco last week, they went into the early slate today and subsequently peed the bed against a Packer team that has really let a lot of teams hang around. They have a couple wins against bad teams with Malik Willis, but what you saw today, you would have thought, Jordan Love was peak Aaron Rodgers all day to throw. I mean, it's a really disheartening performance. And I think, Joe, your exposure to JG, Jonathan Gannon in Philadelphia, I would imagine was a positive one. And we've heard a lot of the same from the accompanied beats here at All City. But right now, you've got 2 blowout losses in the matter of 3 weeks in the second year of this quote-unquote rebuild. And it's incredibly disheartening for this fan base because at the end of last year, they were a missed field goal away from being 4-4 with Kyler Murray in the lineup. So you would assume you get all the offseason resources. They had 7 picks in the top 90. They had $75 million in cap space to spend. And they're all of 2-4 that their record is. Now they've played a gauntlet of a schedule. Every team they have played outside of the Rams has a winning record. And that continues next week at home against those same Chargers, Hank. They play on ESPN Plus on Monday Night Football, which I did not know was a thing. So it's ESPN, Monday Night Football, and then ESPN Plus. You can watch Kyler Murray take on Justin Herbert. But, I mean, as far as this game goes, Cardinals turned it over 3 times. I'm going to read you guys the possessions that they had today. All right. So here are the offensive possessions for the Arizona Cardinals. Punt, 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 punt. They did have a touchdown. Field goal, fumble, fumble, fumble. That was the game today. None of those turnovers came from their quarterback, Kyler Murray, yet they put up 13 points in Lambeau Field. Any takeaways from a Cardinal game that was otherwise forgettable in the early slate? Joe, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I was just talking about it's the hope that kills you. And I think that, the Cardinals are kind of a good example. I did not know that stat, so we talked about it, Johnny, and my mind is still kind of blown away from that because you would think at some point that you get a win, there'd be a back-to-back games against poor teams. But it's kind of like, it's almost as mystifying as, to bring it back to the Cowboys again, of just like why are you winless in your last 4 games at home and just getting destroyed? Like, what is up with your team that you just cannot put 2 and 2 together and win back-to-back games? And, the fact that you read that drive chart off, and it just kind of, I think the thing that kind of always mystifies me about this Cardinals team is, us in Dallas, we know Kyler Murray well. He went to Allen High School down the street. He is arguably the best player in Texas high school football history, which is an honor that is, you look at some of these other guys, that's incredible, right? And it's because of how much pressure he can put on a defense and what he can do. And we saw last week against San Francisco. I mean, he's throwing up the deuces as he's running up to the end zone because he's so talented. And yet I look up, and kind of similar to what you guys were talking about earlier, where you look over and you're like, wait, the score of the game is that because it was the early game? And I'm just like, how is this happening? And, I think the Cardinals, man, like, you got to get some consistency there. And maybe that goes back to Kyler. Maybe it goes back to just keeping drives alive and staying in games because, similar to what we saw in both of our games, Hank, once you get down early like that, your entire offense goes out the window and you're playing catch-up mode. And usually it doesn't work out well, just like we saw with Arizona against Green Bay today.
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I think about the Cardinals, I just go back to that Week 1 game against the Bills. Because if you're able to pull that one off, and they had the ball down 6 with 2 minutes left, something like that, with Kyler Murray, a guy who I think is more than capable of going down the field and scoring a touchdown. I mean, if you win that one, then all of a sudden you're 3-3, and it just changes the entire vibe. It's absolutely been a gauntlet schedule. I think you've seen some awesome flashes of what this team could be. Like I saw today, Trey McBride, Colorado State guy, had like 98 yards. I think that they have maybe not all the pieces they need to be successful, but at least enough. And I'm not sure if the schedule opens up at some point, but I'm optimistic that they can be a good football team built off of the structure that they have right now. I don't think that this is a team that needs to be torn down and rebuilt. The pieces for some reason just don't quite fit together the way you'd think they would.
I mean, this is their schedule to open up the year at Bills, then Rams at home. But I mean, it's a McVay Shanahan led team. Then Detroit, the Commanders, who are white hot, at the Niners, at the Packers. I mean, it's about as difficult of a 6-game stretch to start the year. And then they play the Chargers, the Dolphins, the Bears, and the Jets ahead of the bye. So 4 of the top 10 defenses in the NFL. Here's where I'm at with this team right now. They are flawed, but they are a byproduct, in my opinion, of trying to have your cake and eat it too. When this regime took over 18 months ago, they had an opportunity to say, we're going to embrace Kyler Murray and build around him, or we're going to pivot and completely rebuild, and it's going to take time, and we're going to get a Bo Nix, we're going to get a J.J. McCarthy. And then you buy yourself equity with the fan base. Well, what happened last year? They told everybody, not with their words, but with their actions, we're trading Isaiah Simmons, we're gutting this down, we're starting Joshua Dobbs. Everybody knew what last year was. And then Kyler came back and showed a lot of promise. And so everybody said, okay, let's load up in the offseason. Certainly don't compromise your future, but make yourself viable and relevant. Well, they have taken an approach where they have embraced Kyler Murray, and to his credit, he's had a phenomenal offseason. I think he's playing well this year. He only has 2 turnovers on the year. And they're paying him $50+ million, but they're treating the rest of the roster like the situations around the NFL, like New England, like some of these teams that are basically starting from scratch. But then, oh, by the way, now you have expectations because Kyler Murray is your quarterback, and he's going to be 28 next year. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Either fully commit to this rebuild, and you should have moved off of him and gotten a rookie and started everything over, or a bridge guy. Or, in my opinion, you should have said, let's go out and spend a little bit more. They're sitting on $30 million in cap space. They didn't spend that money. They didn't add anybody of note to go get an edge rusher in free agency. They haven't had an edge rusher sack in over a month. And this is Jonathan Gannon's defense we're talking about. And then you look on the flip side offensively. They have managed to do the one thing that I did not even think my Arizona Cardinals could do. They are ruining Marvin Harrison Jr. He left today's game with a concussion, okay, save for the breakout game against the LA Rams where he took over. I mean, he's been a very average receiver by the box score. Now, we've talked to everybody on our show. I'm going to do a bunch of shameless plugs here. Mina Kimes, Michael Wilson, Brian Baldinger. We have all of them on in rotation, PHNX Cardinals. And the common denominator is this is not a Marvin problem. This is a byproduct of trying to fit Marvin into a scheme offensively with Drew Petzing, who came from Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland, that wants to fit a square peg into a round hole, that wants to run the football. I'm sorry, there are expectations when you take a player of this caliber not to scheme them open and showcase them and make them a focal point of your offense. The Arizona Cardinals under Drew Petzing, since he took over last year, I tweeted this out. I couldn't believe it. I had to chart it after the game. 23 games, they've got one 100-yard wide receiver, and it was Marvin and 2. It's just unbelievable. These stats are so incredibly sobering for Cardinal fans. So, like, I'm sitting here, I'm buying Kyler Murray, maybe not as the number 1 overall pick savior he was once thought to be. Like, I'm probably at the point where he's never going to be Mahomes or Josh Allen. But, like, I do think, like, just like Dak Prescott and some of these quarterbacks closer to like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, he can very much win you games, keep you relevant, win you a division. Like, that's not nothing in the NFL. But he can't overcome what's happening right now with the state of this roster. So you're in a tough spot where this coaching staff, and to your point, Joe and Hank, they have some winnable games on the back half of their schedule. They play the Carolinas, they play Seattle, they play the Patriots, right? They get the Rams again. But at that point, like, are you going to be like 3-8? Are you going to be like 3-7? Everybody wants to compare this to Detroit. Year 2 under Dan Campbell with Jared Goff, they were like, what was it, 1-6? Then they became the juggernaut they are now. And I keep telling everybody, Joe, that's the outlier. You know, that's not the norm. The norm is typically when you're bad, you stay bad. And then it creates, in my opinion, unrealistic expectations for Gannon next year to have to immediately win for a team that has single-digit dubs each of the last 2 years.
Let me ask you guys a quick question, because we talked about this on our podcast a couple weeks ago, and I'm just curious. And obviously, you guys are not in the NFC East, but who would you say the best head coach in the NFC East is? Good question, right?
Wow.
Probably
Yeah.
McCarthy by default, but like I think Daboll is a good head coach. I think he's being held back by his quarterback.
So I answered Bill Belichick in 2025 for either the
Nice.
Giants or Cowboys, but I was thinking Daboll would be a contender, and a big reason why is, and you touched on this, Johnny, with Marvin Harrison and what they're doing schematically. Go look at what they do with Malik Neighbors, and obviously I think Danny Dimes is holding them back a little bit, right? I think the running game's a little bit, Devin Singletary had a good run, but it's not that great. Go look at what they've done with Malik Neighbors when he's been healthy. They are putting him in motion constantly. They are scheming him wide open. They are doing whatever they can to get their best weapon, the ball. And I think that's something that a lot of offensive coordinators forget to do, and especially with a guy like Marvin Harrison. Scheme him open. Put him in motion. Make sure that, like, hey, we're going to run, him off of Trey McBride this way. He's going to get attention, and we're going to try to get one-on-one matchups, Marvin Harrison against linebackers. And that, opens up everything else for Kyler Murray, and it opens it up for McBride and Wilson, and then you're off and running from there. And I think one thing that this Cowboys team, too, has kind of taught me this season is, like, if you're not scheming, you're not trying. And I think Arizona might be kind of similar in that boat as well. One more thing, Johnny, you touched on that I really liked. It's to have your cake and eat it too. I think one of the most mistreated first-round pick quarterback projects we've ever seen was Trey Lance in San Francisco, because they tried to have their cake and eat it too. Let's get a raw prospect and develop him. But we also have a Super Bowl window that we're trying to do, so we're not going to develop him. It was a massive failure in San Francisco because of the cake and eat it too philosophy. And I think that's something that if you're an NFL team, you really got to guard against, for the sake of being relevant. No, you either got to go all in, to quote Jerry Jones, or go all out.
Yeah, and I totally agree with everything you're saying about Marvin Harrison. Also, I mean, he has more yards than anybody on the Broncos roster. He has more touchdowns than anybody on the Broncos roster. Like, it's not like this came from.
He had 100, and not to interrupt you, he had 130 yards and 2 touchdowns in a quarter, the first quarter against the LA Rams. And then from there, it's been like, you know what? We're just going to treat you like just a guy, a complimentary guy. There's no creativity. Like, I bring this up, gentlemen, all the time. When he's at Ohio State, like, give Ryan Day credit. Not this weekend, obviously, and Joe, you're relishing in that, I'm sure. But, like, they would do end-arounds with him. They would do bubble screens. They would get him isolated. It's this route tree he's running. It's like, yes, he's getting singled up against number 1 corners, but there's no creativity. He and Kyler Murray are not on the same page. Everything looks hard. And this is not just like a top 10 receiver. This is supposed to be Randy Moss reincarnated, Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones. Like, do better. Do better. Like, you're getting paid to take a prospect like that and put him on a pedestal and make him a focal point. And, like, you forget about him. He's just not around. They have to do a better job. Absolutely. It's an embarrassment.
100%. I mean, like you're saying with Neighbors, like the Raiders do a great job with Brock Bowers. Like, it's what you do. Like, if you draft that guy that high, you build your offense around him. And to not do that is just a massive mistake. Also, for a rookie receiver, he's playing pretty well, and the numbers are not that bad.
Yeah. It's frustrating because I think, listen, Kyler Murray throws a beautiful deep ball. He's got a big-time arm. He's on pace for, like, 3,200 yards passing. And Marvin can't produce through the air. It's like the common denominator is, and I like Drew Petzing. I thought he did a lot of good things last year, but, man, you got to be able to scheme for your talent. And it felt like last year with no expectations, he did much better than clearly this year with increased expectations. Like, if the Cardinals are going to be competitive, it's not with this defense. It has to be with their offense. All right.
We all silly like the mayor.